Good afternoon, Mr. Lilly. Reporter checking in.
Good afternoon, Ms. Diaz. How's all your equipment working today?
Great. It apparently was a bunch of Microsoft updates. I had to reboot it the seventh time it took.
Okay, well, I'm glad things are working well now.
Yeah.
And please just let me know if there are any issues.
Thank you. You're wonderful.
Well, other people might dispute that, but thank you. All right, well, it looks like everybody has now logged on. So good afternoon. My name is Alan Lilly. I'm the presiding hearing officer of the State Water Resources Control Board's Administrative Hearings Office. Today is February 1st, 2022, and this is the continuation of the Administrative Hearings Office's hearing on the prosecution team's draft cease and desist order against BlueTriton Brands, Inc. And now I'm talking too fast, so I'll slow down, which I refer to as BlueTriton. And appearances all previously were made, and they all show up on the Zoom video, so I'm not going to ask people to enter appearances this afternoon. We have a couple of things on the agenda. We will see how far we get. I know Mr. Donlin asked me to stop today at 2:30 because of I'll say a schedule conflict he has, and I certainly respect that. So we will do that. If we cannot finish with everything today, we will reconvene tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. I have another matter from 9 until roughly 11, so that's why we have to start at 11 tomorrow. So I believe where we were yesterday, where we finished yesterday, is Mr. Sanders completed his cross-examination questions for Mr. Lowe. And Ms. Doty said she had some redirect questions. Before we get to Ms. Doty, is there anybody else who I did not call on who has cross-examination questions for Mr. Lowe? Okay, I didn't think there. Oh, wait, Ms. Belenke, please go ahead.
It's not really a cross-examination question, but it is a clarification point, because at one point, it's just a clarification about which document was being referred to by Mr. Lowe yesterday.
Okay, so is this a question you want to ask Mr. Lowe to testify to?
Yes.
All right, I will allow that to go ahead. Please go ahead, and if you need to, just let me know, and I will ask my staff to put the appropriate exhibit up on our screen share.
Thank you. Do you want me to do that now?
Well, go ahead, but if you're going to ask him to clarify about an exhibit,
Okay.
it probably is best to have the exhibit posted on the screen.
Yes, well, Mr. Lowe, yesterday near the end of your cross-examination, you referred to a map that was a row map, and you said it was very detailed. And I'm just wondering if you could point us to which map you were referring to. I found one map at SOS 049, but I want to make sure I'm looking at the same map that you are.
All right, well, let's put up SOS 49 and ask Mr. Lowe, after he's looked at it, if that is in fact the row map he was referring to yesterday. And while we're doing that, Mr. Petrozelli, I see your hand just went up. So excuse me, Ms. Belenke, but Mr. Petrozelli, do you want to ask your question now or after?
No, I'm sorry to interrupt. Mr. Lilly, I've been notified that the YouTube link doesn't appear to be operating yet.
Oh, well, that's pretty important. So let's put a pause on. I'll see. I'm going to just go with my staff here. I do go with communicate with them by Teams. So let me just make sure, but let's put on pause and make sure the YouTube link is up, because that is certainly part of our whole process.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting me know. We have all this technology and we sort of get used to it, but we have to make sure it works. part of our problem is one of our staff members is out today, so we're one short on running everything.
Alan, it appears the YouTube's working. It's just the title of the video is incorrect.
What
video's
is the title that is up there now?
Currently is 2022-02-02 City of Solvang pre-hearing conference.
Okay, well, that's not very good.
We can have it renamed shortly.
Okay, let's pause for that and get that going. I mean, I don't know whether anybody is watching the YouTube of this hearing, but in case they are, we want to make sure they can. So, sorry for the delay. We do have a pre-hearing conference tomorrow in the City of Solvang matter, so that's probably why that name went up there. But obviously, it's not correct. Okay, just a minute. We're trying to change the title. My staff informs me that they are working on changing the title, so please bear with us. While they are working on that, I'm just going to ask, we have a Chris C, who I've not seen before, and I'd like to put your last name. Also, there's a video with no person showing, but Chris C, if you can let us know who you are, I'd like to have my staff put the full name in.
Hello, I'm a member of the public. My name is Chris Carson.
Okay, good afternoon, Ms. Carson, and you're certainly welcome to participate, and you don't have to show your face if you don't want to. You might want to, if you want to just turn off your video camera, that's fine. And I certainly am not going to criticize you for calling into Zoom since our YouTube link is not working right now. So thank you.
Yes, if you prefer me to use YouTube, I'll do that next time.
No, you can stay here, but it might be good if you have a way to turn off your camera.
Okay, sure.
It's a little eerie just having a ceiling.
Oh, sorry.
No problem. All right, so Mr. Anderson, have we solved the YouTube problem yet, or are we still working on it?
Yeah, it's been fixed.
All right. So, Mr. Petrozelli, I don't know if your informant can tell you if the YouTube link is going, but we're going to assume it is unless he or she advises you. And oh, I've got a thumbs up, so that means we're good. So, for those of you who are on YouTube, who we cannot see, but you can see and hear me, I apologize. We apparently had the wrong label on the YouTube link, which was the label for tomorrow morning's status conference. So I apologize, but we did delay. And we have not done anything in the hearing yet, and we are now going to start. So again, my name is Alan Lilly, presiding hearing officer of the State Water Board's Administrative Hearings Office. And today is February 1, 2022, and it's in the afternoon, and this is our next session on the hearing by the Administrative Hearings Office on the prosecution team's draft cease and desist order against BlueTriton Brands, Inc. And where we were when Mr. Petrozelli advised us of the YouTube link problem was Ms. Belenke was going to ask Mr. Lowe a clarification question. And as part of that question, we were going to post exhibit SOS 49. So let's get that exhibit posted, and then Ms. Belenke may ask her question. Please proceed.
Thank you.
And Mr. Lowe, just to remind you, you still are under oath.
Mr. Lowe, is this the map you were referring to yesterday in your testimony when you said you were looking at a detailed map from the Rowe papers?
Yes, this map is essential to understand the Rowe papers at all. And the reason I was showing.
Wait, Mr. Lowe, I
sorry.
really don't want to avoid these rambling responses.
I'm sorry.
You have answered Ms. Belenke's question, so please just leave it at that. And Ms. Belenke, do you have any further questions for this witness at this time?
I had a further question, but I'm trying to make sure if I have it was also from an exhibit. So.
Okay, we can certainly post another exhibit if you need us to.
I just need to see if I can find it quickly. Wasn't sure we're going to start here.
Put you on the spot, but go ahead.
That's okay. I just need to find the exhibit. Oh, maybe I might have written down the wrong number. I had SOS 56, but that is not an exhibit number, apparently.
I can check.
No, I don't think it is.
Okay.
It might have been 55.
And 55, but 55. It was one that had these, we were talking about part of it, and then later it had these like hydrographs, and I just wanted to ask you about them. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, I think it's in.
Might it be 42?
Yeah, I was just going to say, he did testify to exhibit SOS 42, which has some tables of flow records and also some graphs. So why don't we put up SOS 42 and let them.
Yes,
let
I
us
think
know
it
if
was
that's it.
there. Yes, and I think it's then down in it's the PDF page is 15.
Okay, so we'll
So
move
this
to
is
15.
SOS 42. And
Okay.
it's PDF page 15. Because, okay, Mr. Lowe, you were discussing the Rowe papers and places where you thought perhaps he was putting in storm runoff as the flow, or trying to distinguish between storm runoff and the other flow. Does this page, this graph, help at all with that question?
Objection, leading.
Well,
Um,
he's not my witness.
I don't think that's a leading question. I'm going to allow Mr. Lowe to answer it. Please go ahead, Mr. Lowe, if you can answer.
Okay, so I didn't really study this much because I was looking mainly at the figures to see. I wasn't that concerned about high flows in the winter, but from what I can tell, Well, it for sure shows high flows in the red that are storm runoff. It shows drainage flows to be much less than the peak flows. To tell you the truth, maybe my eyes are bad, but I can't see spring flows at all. I don't see any green spring flows on that map, which maybe is true. And this,
All right. I think you've answered her question, Mr. Lowe. So please.
well, excuse me, I was going to make clear that this is all the way down at the hotel intake. It's not up at the headwater springs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Those were my two questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Belenke. All right, so I do have, since we have those exhibits up there, I do have a couple of follow-up questions for Mr. Lowe before we shift back to Ms. Doty's redirect. Mr. Wooldridge, please post again exhibit SOS 42 and move to PDF page 2. All right, and if you can just zoom in on the bottom quarter, or just bottom part of that. One more zoom up. There we go. So that's great. Thank you. So I can read it. All right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 11 lines from the bottom, Mr. Lowe. On the right side of the page, there's a sentence that begins, the junction of flow. Do you see that?
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to read that sentence to you.
Okay.
The junction of flow together with, excuse me, the junction of flow from all of the upper springs at the head of Strawberry Creek is at station, it looks like 123 plus 00, comma, or 12,300 feet upstream from the old intake to the 4-inch pipe from Strawberry Creek to the Arrow Hotel, which was laid in 1929. Do you see that sentence?
Yes.
All right. So what is your understanding of who built that old intake and had that pipe laid?
The Arrowhead Hotel, which was called Arrowhead Springs, I guess, at that time. And Consolidated Water had a deal. So I'm not sure if Consolidated had any money in that original 1929 pipe to the hotel pickup. But then from there, which I'll show you on the row map if you want to see, from there, then it went up the West Fork of Strawberry Creek. And I know that
all right. Yeah,
Consolidated Water paid for that. That's what I was just going to tell you. Consolidated Water paid for the pipeline from the springs down to connect to the Consolidated Water, to the Arrowhead Springs. It was an in-stream diversion from what I can tell. So they connected the pipeline together is what happened.
All right, so let's actually go forward to SOS 49. And Mr. Wooldridge, you had that up before. Hopefully you can get back to it.
Yes.
There we go. So and if you can just scroll down a little bit. There you go. Zoom in one. There you go. Perfect. Thank you. Kind of in the middle of exhibit SOS 49. So Mr. Lowe, please just describe in words referring to this exhibit where this old intake that was referenced in the text I just read to you, where was that located on this exhibit SOS 49?
It's where it shows Weir 3 Station 1.
All right, thank you.
And that's why they put 0 there.
Okay, I was wondering, why does it say Station 1 instead of Station 0?
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird, huh? I guess the Weir may be at Station 1 versus at hotel at 0. the pickup at 0. That's all I can think of.
And from what I can tell from the station numbering system, is each station basically 100 feet?
You know, I didn't try to figure that out because there's not a whole lot of references to stations that I needed to get that detailed of the feet out of it. I used it to like it would say a good way to, well, like station 39, go up the creek to station 39. They would reference that station 39 is at the East Fork. So then station 61 or 61. Yeah, 61. So it doesn't always look like it's feet. It looks like it may have been where they were something they wanted to do to me. I don't know. It may, I don't know. I don't know exactly what that is, but
Okay.
I didn't pay attention because I could find where things were on the stream. I spent a lot of time with aerial photos, which helped also. So let's go ahead while we're on this one and that station.
Objection.
Wait. Yeah, Mr. Lowe,
Okay.
we really
Sorry.
do have to keep you to answering questions here.
I'm
So-
sorry.
Please stop. Let me ask another question. All right, and I'm going to go back to SOS 42, to that sentence we were just looking at.
Okay.
And well, Mr. Woldrich will just make it bigger for us again. I'm not going to reread that same sentence again, but it did say that the pipe was laid in 1929. Is that your understanding based on your review of the various row report documents as to when that pipe you just talked about from the, I'll say from the lower intake near station 1 or station 0 to the hotel, is your understanding that that was installed in about 1929?
Yes.
Okay, and again, who installed that? I think we asked before about the intake, but who installed the pipe that went from the intake to the Arrowhead Hotel?
Arrowhead Springs Hotel, as far as I know.
All right,
There may have been a contribution from Consolidated Water.
all right,
Can I
thank you.
object again for the basis of the foundation for these statements? I mean, we're asking. I appreciate you're entitled to ask questions, Mr. Lilly, but you are asking questions of a witness and asking him to speak as if what he says is necessarily fact without asking the basis of any of these opinions or the documents that lay the foundation for those opinions.
All right, and I apologize. My question. So I'm going to sustain the objection. That's pretty good, Ms. Grady. You just got an objection to one of my own questions, but because I think what I should have asked was, what is his understanding? So I will restate the question. So, Mr. Lowe, based on your review of all of the row papers and the other historical documents you testified to yesterday, what is your understanding as to the date that this pipeline from the weir at either Station 0 or Station 1 to the Arrowhead Hotel, what is your understanding of what year that pipe was installed?
1929.
And what is your understanding as to who installed that pipe?
Arrowhead Springs Hotel in cooperation with Consolidated Water.
All right, now if we can go, I'm sorry, one more question regarding diversions from Strawberry Creek to the Arrowhead Springs Hotel. Based on your review of all the historical documents, do you have any information or understanding that there were any diversions from Strawberry Creek to the Arrowhead Springs Hotel anytime before 1929?
It appears that there may have been a pipeline that predated the one that we just looked at by maybe 6 months to a year into the bottom of Strawberry Creek, about a half a mile up from the hotel. But it looks like that was quickly abandoned. I think probably because my opinion is because of several factors. One, there wasn't a whole lot of water getting there. And two, it appeared to cross the creek, which would have been very hard to maintain with the flows that we get in that area with floodwaters. So I think at some point really quickly they decide, and it may have just been blueprints is all that they had. I think they very quickly then decided to go up the way they went all the way to where the hotel pickup is on the blueprint that we looked at there, and did that in 29. So I think that all happened in 1929.
All right. So other than that possible pipe, I think you said 6 months to 1 year earlier, are you aware of any other diversions from anywhere on Strawberry Creek to the Arrowhead Springs Hotel before 1929?
No.
All right, if we can go back to SOS 49. And if you can, Mr. Wolders, just scroll down a little bit here, make it bigger. Thank you. Mr. Lowe, do you see on the left-hand side where it says hotel?
Yes.
And then just above that, there's a depiction of another pipeline which says Cold CR, which I assume means Cold Creek pipeline. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, based on your review of all of the historical documents you've testified to, what is your understanding as to when this pipeline, the Cold Creek pipeline, was built?
I think it was about the same time. It may have been earlier. So it may have started earlier in 29 or maybe even 28, but it was basically at the same time from my understanding.
All right. And do you have any knowledge as to who built that pipeline?
I have a feeling it was probably a joint thing again. For sure, the hotel was getting water from Coldwater, so I know they were involved. And Roe did some of the work, so I don't know. It could have been a cooperative deal again, or it could have just all been the hotel.
All right. Well, I just want you to testify to the best of your knowledge, and that's fine. Shifting to a different topic, you mentioned the row notes have tables that refer to flows in miners inches under 4-inch head. Do you remember that discussion?
Yes.
So what is the conversion factor? What if you have 1 miner's inch flowing under 4-inch head, how many gallons per minute does that equal?
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing. When I was trying to figure out what to use, it said 11 inches in some spots, and then it said 9 inches in other. So it said that 9 inches was Southern California versus Northern California, which was kind of interesting. So I tried both figures to see what correlated to what Roe was coming up with in gallons per minute, and determined that consistently throughout he used 9 gallons per minute.
So 9 gallons per minute equals 1 miner's inch under 4-inch head?
Yes.
All right, thank you. All right, that is all the questions I have for your testimony that you submitted on behalf of Story of Stuff Project. And with that, I will turn it to Ms. Doty for redirect questions. And just remember, Ms. Doty, under the rules and the government code, redirect questions are limited to the scope of what was discussed in cross-examination questions.
Right, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Lowe.
Good afternoon.
So I'm going to ask you a few questions about your education. You covered this pretty thoroughly in your evidentiary statement, but can you tell me if you received any, if you took any classes after you completed your bachelor's degree that pertained to your professional obligations at the Forest Service?
Well, I took a lot of classes, some Forest Service classes, some Wildlife Society classes. I took a geology class at Yavapai Junior College. So I took a lot of classes at different times.
Okay, any hydrology classes?
No, I had soil and water in college, but I didn't have any afterwards.
Okay, what about on-the-job training?
We received on-the-job training the whole time, basically, that we were working. My last 10 or 12 years, I had a huge amount of on-the-job training in geology, hydrogeology, tunnels, and groundwater, surface water relationships. I would accompany the hydrologist and the geologist. The first few years before the tunnel started, a big part of my job was being able to work with those guys and understand exactly what they were saying. So when the tunnel started being constructed, we could make decisions really quickly without having to learn what they were talking about.
Would you say that you thoroughly understand the natural history of Strawberry Canyon?
I understand the ecology of Strawberry Canyon. The natural history I have I have a good idea of, but there's better naturalists than me. But there's really not anybody that's better at geology, hydrology, surface water, wildlife, and plant relationships. I know as much about that as anyone, especially in that area. I've worked in all the watersheds that surround Strawberry Creek, and I've worked in those watersheds with hydrologists and geologists.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lowe. Could we put up SOS Exhibit 24, but also keep SOS Exhibit 49 close at hand?
SOS 24 will go up. And I think Mr. Woldridge keeps the other exhibits open because we know that they get referred to again. We now have SOS 24 on the screen.
Okay, Mr. Lowe, do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And have you reviewed this document?
Yes.
Are you familiar with its contents?
Yes.
Okay, if we could go to page 10, please.
Objection. Can we have a proffer of how this is redirect?
Ms. Doty, how is this how are these questions going to relate to questions that other attorneys asked on cross-examinations?
I'm going to ask him to compare present day locations from a on-the-ground picture here that was prepared by BTB's own consultant with the locations on the row map. He was asked by Mr. Petrozelli and then by you about various locations, and I believe also by Mr. Sanders yesterday.
All right, so I'm going to overrule the objection. I think that is an appropriate offer of proof. And it's basically, you're using this exhibit for the sole purpose on this line of questioning to use this map. Is that correct, Ms. Doty?
To use this image, it's I believe a Google Earth image or something similar that shows the landscape.
I stand corrected, not a map. All right, so I'm going to overrule the objection. You may go ahead and please just ask us what part of the exhibit.
Mr. Lilly, pardon me, just one second. I just want to note for the record again that we object to the fact that we are layering what's being deemed cross-examination and redirect where we have aligned parties all versus BlueTriton. And so what we're instead seem to be having is a multiple layer direct tag team approach to this proceeding, which is feeling a little bit more like old television wrestling instead of an actual proceeding.
Well, I don't know what your analogy is, but just to clarify, number one, I do not represent any party and I'm not taking any position. I have no idea where I'm going to come out on any of these issues. So I disagree with your characterization that if you were suggesting that my questions were aligned with any party. And secondly, beyond that, I think that rules in Government Code section 11513 subdivision B allow for, I don't see that there's any provision in there whether cross-examination is friendly or unfriendly or neutral, but they appear to allow for redirect within the scope of the cross-examination. So for those reasons, I overrule your objection. And you may proceed. It probably would be good, Ms. Doty, if I don't think you'd actually stated a question. So please ask us, my staff, where you want us to zoom in on this so we can see it and then ask your question.
Okay. Mr. Lowe, you were asked where 00 is a moment ago, the 00 intake. Can you locate the 00 intake first on this SOS 24?
It's on the next page. This only goes down to the meadow in 10, 11, 12.
So if we could scroll to the next page, please, and then zoom in towards well, Mr. Lowe will have to direct you.
Okay, so Mr.
Yeah,
Lowe,
yeah.
tell us where we should zoom in to get the depiction of station 00 if we can on this map.
Yeah, let me see if I can, oh, I can't move it.
No, you have to tell us.
Okay, go downstream. Downstream. Okay, let's see. Hang on. Go back, go back upstream a little bit. Yeah, I'm having a hard time on this map without being able to control it myself to tell where I'm at.
All right, maybe we can, it looks like we might need to go down a little bit more. I assume that yellow line is the section line.
No, that dash line there is a fault.
Oh, okay, excuse me. I shouldn't make assumptions.
That's okay, but I'm just having a hard time without this in front of me. Okay, let's go up a little more. Up a little, I mean, down more, I'm sorry. Down some more. Now, they're on the right. Yes, okay. Okay, now that right there is the confluence of East Strawberry that you've all heard about. So let's keep going down some more.
So that means we have to go to the next page.
We're not gonna have enough map. The thing is, that's why we can't go there, Miss Doty, is because here they're only monitoring in the adaptive management plan, only monitoring.
We're going well beyond the question, Mr. Lilly.
They're only monitoring.
Yeah, I think, Mr. Lowe, I'm going to sustain the objection.
Okay.
The answer is this map does not show the area where station 00 is. So, Ms. Doty, I think it's time for you to ask your next question.
Okay, Mr. Lowe, can you show me where the location of I'm sorry, one moment. Can you show me where the location of springs 1, 2, and 3 is on this exhibit 49 or 24 is?
Yes, we need to go up to the top of page 10. Okay, now if we can, yeah, there we go. There, a little, not quite so much, a little less. There we go. A little less. Okay. Now see those rectangular boxes up at the top, the long skinny ones. That's tunnel 3, tunnel 2, tunnel 1, 1A, and 8. So
I'm sorry, could you zoom in a bit more? It's just very hard to see what you're talking about. And could you give us the color of the boxes you're referencing when you say the boxes, Mr. Lowe?
the spring boxes are actually the green boxes. The monitoring points are the yellow. And the black dashed line is where there's no flow. The blue line is where there's flows. And in the box where it points to the blue lines, it tells how many gallons per minute were flowing in 2016.
Okay, Mr. Lowe, but could you please just identify?
Excuse me for one moment, please. I'm trying not to speak over him when he's testifying, so I would appreciate if there could be a pause so I could have an opportunity when needed to object. Please, I know it's hard for all of us on this platform. But I would like to object again to clarify that we're asking the witness here, or you're asking the witness here for his opinion about something that he did not create. I think we're making a very unclear record.
All right, so Ms. Doty, I'm going to overrule the objection because I think it's pretty clear he's describing his understanding of what this exhibit depicts. But Ms. Doty, it probably would help in the future for your next questions to ask him what his understanding is of what this figure is depicting based on his review of it and his knowledge of the area and all his other knowledge from reviewing documents that he's testified to.
And to be clear, Mr. Lowe, I'm not asking you if the things indicated on this map are accurate. You can use them for navigation, but I'm asking you to navigate us to the sites you're referencing. But I'm asking you to speak from your experience and understanding regarding where the items I'm going to ask you about are located. So please just use whatever's drawn on this picture to direct us to the approximate location of what I'm asking you about. So again, I'll ask you approximately where are the springs that Mr. Rowe referred to as springs 1, 2, and 3 on this map that you're looking at?
They're the green boxes.
Okay, 1, 2, and 3.
2, 3, 1, and 1A and 8.
Yeah,
Okay.
Miss Doherty, that ends up being a compound question, so I think you probably need to split it up separately
Okay,
for each spring.
sure. Mr. Lowe, where is it your understanding that the spring that Mr. Rowe labeled spring 1 on his exhibit 49 we were just looking at is located in this image?
It's located on the right-hand side and it says horizontal borings 1, 1A, and 8.
Okay, and what about the spring that Mr. Rowe identified as spring 2?
It's labeled as tunnel 2.
And what about the spring that Mr. Rowe identified as spring 3 on his exhibit 40, on our exhibit 49?
It's labeled tunnel 3.
Okay. And then can you tell me where the 10, 11, 12 complex is on this image that you're looking at?
Objection,
So-
this is beyond the scope of the cross-examination.
I'm going to overrule that. I believe he did talk about 10, 11, and 12. And if not, it's within the general scope of his testimony on cross-ex. So the objection is overruled. Please, Mr. Lowe, just tell us where we need to scroll to answer, so you can answer the question.
Okay, you go down below the confluence. This is the confluence. So you go up. Yeah, there you go. And keep going till you come to something that looks like a meadow. Here we go. There's the meadow. Okay, that's zoom in there on the meadow. Yes, and you got to get rid of Mr. Lilly because he's in my box right there.
I think you have to move that. That's not, you can't get rid of me. You should be able to move the box around. Can you see the area now?
Okay, yes. So the springs are at the green box, and that's 10, 11, and 12.
Okay, if we could put back up SOS 49 for a moment, please. Mr. Lowe, can you tell me where on Rowe's map it would be your understanding that springs 10, what we call the 10, 11, 12 complex today would be located?
Yes, about 2/3 of the way up the creek from the bottom of the map. Keep going up. Okay, there, hold pause there. Okay, so that meadow system is part of that thing that's called the valley. It is on both sides. Right there, station 84 is where the springs are. And the creek across the way is the 7 drainage that comes in from complex 7.
Okay, thank you. And do you know if Rowe was taking flow in the measurements Mr. Sanders asked you about yesterday from surface sources or below ground sources?
They were surface sources. Except in some cases, he was telling us how much was being diverted in the pipe.
Was the water that was, do you know if the water that was being diverted in the pipe surface flow or flow from below the surface of the ground?
It was from the developed surface flow, the spring flow at number 2.
Yesterday, Mr. Petrozelli asked you about some aggregate flow Do you recall talking about aggregate flow in your testimony in response to Mr. Petrozelli's questions yesterday?
I believe I probably talked about it in several spots, but I think I know where he talked about it.
Can you identify on this SOS 42 where that aggregate flow was taken from? That sample?
If it was the aggregate flow of the upper springs, it's at weir number 1.
Okay.
And that's what I think it was talking about.
Okay, and then there was talk about a Cienega.
The Cienega is where the 10, 11, and 12 come in at, and it's right at station 84.
All right, Mr. Petrozelli also asked you about that aggregate flow, and I believe you said 150 gallons a minute in response to his question about aggregate production at the headwater springs. Is that your recollection, or do you have a different?
No.
Well,
yeah.
excuse me. I'm going to object to that or ask you to restate that, Ms. Doty. And if you need to, we can go to the exhibit, which I think was SOS 42, but I think there were different flows on different dates. So I think your question is a little confusing if you just refer to a number without specifying the date on which the flow was measured. So I'm going to ask you to restate that question if you want to pursue this line of questioning.
Okay. Mr. Lowe, in having reviewed the row documents, what do you think the aggregate flow is for production in the headwater springs?
And again, I'm sorry, Ms. Doty, but if you don't have a date, the question is ambiguous because he's already testified that the flows varied from day to day. So I don't think you can just say, what is the aggregate flow without mentioning a certain date.
Okay, I'm going to look back for a second at the testimony. Okay, at some point, there was a discussion, and I actually believe it was Mr. Lilly's question. It says, actually, no, sorry, it says Petrus Elliott, which is kind of funny. It says the dependable supply will aggregate about 10 inches. Can you tell me what that means? The dependable supply will aggregate about 10 inches.
And I'm sorry, Ms. Doty, but this question is ambiguous if we don't have the memo up on the screen. So okay. Is that SOS 42 that the questions were about? Because if so, I would like to have that exhibit posted, and you can point to where the phrase dependable supply of 10 minus inches is.
Okay, one moment, I'll be able to find it in just a second. I believe it's exhibit 42. Yes. So exhibit 42, the page, PDF page 2, and it's in the last paragraph. And
okay, go ahead. Tell us where you want to read.
So it's a sentence that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 6 lines down in that paragraph that starts with the dependable supply.
Okay, Mr. Lowe, do you see that where it says the dependable supply will aggregate?
Yes, and it shows up several places in other documents as well.
Okay, but her question is about this sentence. So go ahead and ask your question, Ms. Doty.
Okay. So what it says is the dependable supply will aggregate about 10 inches. And what I am curious is, what does that mean? The dependable supply will aggregate about 10 inches.
And again, before Ms. Grady objects, I'm going to object. I know, Ms. Doty, you're doing the best you can, but you have to say or ask him what his understanding is of what this statement is based on his review of this document and the other documents he's reviewed, rather than simply what it means.
Mr.
So please
Lowe,
restate the question.
Mr. Lowe, what is your understanding as to what this statement written here, the dependable supply will aggregate about 10 inches? What does that mean what is your understanding of what that means?
I believe he was trying to give the people that were investing money an idea that they could count on there being at least 10 miners inches a year coming per 9 inches per minute of flow coming from the upper spring complex.
And have you reviewed the data points that Mr. Rowe collected?
Excuse me, Ms. Stody. I want to make sure we have a clear record too. And Mr. Lowe, I'm pretty sure you misspoke there. So I think what's important to clarify, you said 10 inches and then you said 9 inches per minute. And you previously told me that
10
one miner's inch, wait, let me finish.
Okay.
That 1 miner's inch equals 9 gallons per minute. So is what you're saying is that your understanding is he was saying the dependable supply will be 9 inches, which is about 90 gallons per minute?
Yes.
All right, thank you for that clarification. And with that, Ms. Doty, you may proceed.
And Mr. Lowe, have you examined the data points from which it appears in your opinion, Mr. Rowe based this conclusion?
Yes, I believe I've reviewed them. I'm not sure, what you don't know is which ones he used to make that statement from. So he's the one who could best tell you what exactly but anyway, he felt like you could count on that 24 hours a day, I believe, 365 days a year to be producing that 10 inches. And that's how they calculated their investment.
And have you reviewed his field notes and compilations of measurements taken, in your opinion, from the various springs in Strawberry Canyon?
Yes.
And do you come up with a similar number when you look at those data points?
I believe that, well, see, he didn't do anything about 10, 11, and 12. He made no estimates about that. He made no estimates about 7. So his 90 gallons per minute that he could count on in perpetuity only included the headwater springs. And I think they were overly conservative, but he probably had to do that or else they would have hung him if he'd have told them more. So I think he was conservative in that. My estimates are higher than that based on all of the figures that I see. But that's just my opinion.
And in your opinion, what would the number be from his data points? So the historical number for the headwaters aggregate production.
And we just better be clear, Ms. Doty. I think we know what the term headwater springs means, but you might want to make sure you're clear about that. It's ambiguous otherwise.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Mr. Lowe, could you respond to my question, but be careful to be very clear what you believe the headwater springs to be?
Objection. I've lost track of what's the question at this point.
Yeah, and that's probably my fault, so I apologize. Mr. Lowe, what springs are you referring to when you say headwater springs?
I'm referring to spring 1, spring 2, spring 3, and spring 4, which has never been diverted.
All right, so Ms. Doty, I apologize if I disrupted your train of questioning, but now we know what he means by headwater springs. So why don't you now ask your question again?
Okay.
I just was confused.
Sure. So with that definition of headwater springs for the purpose of this line of questioning, Mr. Lowe, in reviewing the data points that Mr. Rowe collected, what do you believe the aggregate historical production was of the headwater springs at the time Mr. Rowe was measuring?
It appears,
Object again, I'm sorry, this is going beyond the scope of the cross-examination and instead expanding the scope artificially of the direct testimony far beyond what was written.
I'm not sure whether this is precisely within the scope of cross or not, but exercising my discretion, I'm going to allow the line of questioning. I think it's important for us to get the clarification on this, so I'm going to overrule the objection.
so to determine what were spring flows and to estimate that is different than saying what is the most that the hotel and consolidated water could count on getting. So the 100 was based on what he thought for sure they could get every year. A lot of years the flow is greater than 100 or 90, all the way up to 150 in a lot of years. So I think that that 100 was a low estimate, and the number is actually probably somewhere between 100 and 150. But people need to study that more than I have, but that's my best shot at this point in time.
And did you draw that calculation for Mr. Rowe's data?
I got it from Mr. Rowe's data, from the Forest Service data of Taylor and Beermar, and I got it from the studies that BlueTriton has paid for with Haley and Aldrich, with the Man report, and Dames and Moore 99 and Dames and Moore 2001.
Mr. Lowe, focusing for a moment on Mr. Rowe's work, were those calculations taken or drawn from a single date, or was the water flow tested on multiple dates?
Well, it was tested on lots and lots of days. The ones I was most concerned about were the earliest ones. So I followed them before number 2 was developed, followed them after number 2 was developed, and followed them for another year or so after 2 was developed.
I'm going to object again. To the extent this is being proffered as expert testimony, the foundation for the last couple questions has been very loose, very unclear, and seems to be offered just as general feelings rather than and assumptions, rather than pointing to conclusions based on information, specific information.
The objection is overruled. I think based on Mr. Lowe's extensive review of the historical documents, this testimony is appropriate under Government Code 11513 subdivision C. I will say, Ms. Doty, you're starting to push the limits here for redirect. So I hope you're going to be able to wrap this up fairly soon.
Okay, I'll move on to a different topic. You were asked yesterday by Mr. Sanders why Mr. Rowe cared about temperature and humidity. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And can you explain what the effect of temperature and humidity is on flow?
Okay. Temperature has a huge effect. The plants are transpiring more under high temperatures, full sunlight, so they're using a lot more of the water. Evaporation is much higher on our hot days here, 100-degree days. Evaporation is greater. So the combination of evaporation and transpiration is much greater on hot days.
Could we put up SOS Exhibit 52, please?
Okay, we will get SOS 52. All right, tell us what page you would like to refer to, or what part.
So it's only 2 pages long. I'd like you to scan it at Mr. Lowe's direction, just so he can see whether or not he's familiar with this document.
Yes.
Okay. And what is the subject matter of this document?
So Ms. Doty,
In your opinion, sorry.
wait. No, that's not my problem here. My problem is I don't remember anybody asking about this exhibit before. And I've given you some fairly broad leeway here on redirect, but how is this related to the questions or within the scope of the questions that someone else asked Mr. Lowe yesterday?
So Mr. Petrozelli asked Mr. Lowe about evapotranspiration pumps and why they might want to remove alder trees. And then Mr. Sanders asked Mr. Lowe why Mr. Rowe was concerned with the humidity and temperature when he was noting flows. And this is an essay by Mr. Rowe.
All right, so what is your question? You're right on the boundary here of permissible redirect, but go ahead and ask your question and we'll see where this goes.
Okay.
And I'm going to object that it misstates the questions asked by Mr. Sanders yesterday about why about humidity. I disagree with that representation of the record. And I think we are going beyond the scope.
Okay, but I think Ms. Doty was just trying to give a general description of the prior question. So Ms. Doty, please go ahead, but do keep in mind this does have to be within the scope of what was covered on cross.
Okay.
Using a totally new exhibit troubles me a little bit, but I'll let you proceed for now, and then we'll see where we go.
Okay. Mr. Lowe, having reviewed the papers, what is your opinion about why Mr. Rowe cared about evapotranspiration in 1931 in Strawberry Canyon?
It's because he was being hired to look at potential for developing water. And he knew that riparian vegetation like alders, willows, cottonwoods, and those things used a lot of water. So one of the things that they were having to do, from what you can tell in this document here, if you take the time to read the whole thing, is they were trying to build the argument that if they were to remove alder trees, they could salvage water that would be lost normally to the vegetation, and therefore they could take water from the headwaters and not affect the downstream users, because they had actually created new water by getting rid of the alders. So that's the argument. If you read down through here, it's kind of interesting. He calls the trees pumps and kind of writes a little story about.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
We're going back out into areas that were not included in this proceeding as directed by your November 4th ruling.
I disagree. I overrule that objection. And you may proceed with your next question, Ms. Doty.
Mr. Lowe, would there have been a need to remove alders in 1931 if the water had been previously diverted?
Wait. Ms. Doty, you're gonna have to be clear there as to where you're talking about previously diverted, and you're also going to have to explain to me how this is within the scope of what's permissible on redirect.
Okay, Mr. Petrozelli had asked about the pump and the removal of alders, and Mr. Lowe has just testified about this paper that Mr. Rowe had written, and it's talking about alternatives, removing water or removing alders, which is exactly, I believe, what Mr. Petrozelli asked about yesterday. So I want to ask Mr. Lowe, I mean, I don't know how to do this without testifying or.
Okay, well, Go ahead and ask your question, but do be clear about when you talk about points of diversion, where you are talking about diversions, particularly whether it's up at the headwater springs or down, I'll say down near the hotel. That's what's not clear to me.
Okay, so Mr. Lowe, in this essay, I guess, that Mr. Rowe wrote in what appears to be 1930, based on the date at the top, what geographic location was Mr. Rowe talking about?
He was speaking about the whole stream, all the way from the top to the bottom to the hotel. And he was looking at all sources of water in all the East Twin tributaries.
Okay. And is it your opinion, from reviewing the historical record and from what you know of the area, strike that. Is it your opinion that piping water directly from what we have today defined as the headwater springs would save at least as much water, salvage at least as much water, as removing trees, as Mr. Rowe proposed in this essay?
Well, if I understand your question, removing the trees by dewatering them is the cheap way to go, and cutting them would have been much more expensive, so they dewatered the stream. Is that, I don't know if that answers your question.
Would there have been a need to cut or starve trees of water if the water had previously been diverted?
That's a weird question. I don't understand. If the water had been previously diverted, then the trees would have already been dead. And then there wouldn't have been a need to cut them, because they would just die and stand there. Once the water was diverted, the trees did start dying, and we have records of that.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe. And then I just have one more line of questions, which is, Mr. Sanders asked you yesterday about what appeared to be some errors in Mr. Rowe's field notes. And I wanted to ask you, do scientists sometimes make mistakes when they're recording field notes?
Sure.
Would you expect in a volume of field notes as large as the one that's been entered into evidence and called the Rowe papers here for Mr. Rowe, would you expect to find an error or two in that?
Sure.
Does the fact that Mr. Rowe may have misentered a number or made some other sort of mistake at some point diminish your esteem of his work?
No.
That's all.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Doty. And thank you, Mr. Lowe. So that completes the questioning of Mr. Lowe. And I believe, Ms. Doty, that completes all of your presentation of evidence for Story of Stuff project. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So would you like to offer any or all of the Story of Stuff exhibits into evidence at this time?
Nearly all of them. One moment, there are a few that were residuals that don't need to come in. Just one moment.
Excuse me, Mr. Lilly, can we have a moment to discuss if we'd like to recross based on that extensive redirect?
Oh, absolutely. So would you like, oh, you want to have a moment? All right, that's fine. I'll give you 3 minutes. It's 2:13. So we'll just kind of turn off our microphones and cameras. Make sure to turn off your microphone and camera, and then you can talk to your colleagues. And let's just come back in 3 minutes. And yes, you do have a right to recross within the scope of the redirect. right, we'll wait just one moment for Miss Grady to come back. All right, we're back on the record. And before I turn to Miss Grady, I do want to just clarify one of my prior rulings. I previously made a ruling regarding the scope of redirect, and I referred to Government Code Section 11513 subdivision B. During our break, I reviewed that and realized that statute does not refer to redirect. And actually the appropriate reference is to our hearing notice, where we talk about in the order of proceeding, there is a section on redirect and recross, and that's where it says the hearing notice states that redirect and recross may not exceed the scope of cross-examination and redirect. And so the clarification is, to the extent there was a question as to whether the redirect was within the scope of the cross-examination, I, exercising my discretion as hearing officer, allowed that to proceed. So with that clarification, Ms. Grady, would you like to conduct any recross of this time?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right. So the next item on our agenda is for Ms. Doty to offer exhibits. And let's see whether we can get through that before 2:30 or not. So Ms. Doty, are you prepared to offer exhibits?
I am, but I would like to exclude from what we had sent on our table of exhibits, SOS 19, 90, 123, and 124.
All right. And I can't, let me just have the first, let's see if I can get the first number and the last number. Too many papers here. What Ms. Doty, is the number of your first exhibit? I believe was SOS 1. What is the number of your last exhibit?
So one moment, because some were impeachment exhibits, so I'm just having to.
Right, thank you.
So our last exhibit number is 271, and unfortunately, I'm having trouble telling which was the last one that we put in. Let's see. So it may have been 265, 266. It's whichever number is directly before the impeachment exhibits we offered. Actually, I should be able to tell by looking at the date here. Right.
I believe it's 264.
I think that is correct because of the dates that they're saved in my folder. So I think it's SOS 1 through 264, although it is not continuous. And then we would like to exclude the ones that I had mentioned.
Right. So the offer is for exhibits SOS 1 through SOS 264, and that is based on the exhibit list that is currently on file with the AHO. And just if people, just a reminder, the Administrative Hearings Office labeled the Doty Declaration as SOS 29, the Fry Declaration as SOS 30, and the Lowe Declaration as SOS 31. So it's with the numbers within that range that are in the exhibit list that we have posted to our webpage, and then Ms. Doty is not offering exhibits SOS 19, 90, 123, and 124. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. So are there any objections to any of these exhibits?
Yes.
All right, Ms. Grady, please go ahead.
I will start with, again, restating the objection to what we've identified as SOS 29 as Ms. Doty's declaration. And the basis for that is the November 17th order was clear that the parties were to submit the ROI identifying each of their witnesses, and then the testimony in writing to follow. I have reviewed my notes and the records and do not see any indication that there was any discussion of her, and we did providing testimony, and we did raise this objection in the motion in limine. So for purposes of the record, I do want to restate that objection and make sure that it is clear that we did object to it in the motion in limine, and again now is improper. And Ms. Doty is an attorney, so the flexibility provided to individuals who are not represented should not be extended to parties that are represented by counsel. And I'll pause there and then proceed when you.
Yeah, just a minute. I'm getting the motion in limine out here. Okay, in your motion in limine, Ms. Grady, you objected on the basis that Ms. Doty had not laid a proper foundation or established the relevance of the documents identified in her testify, and she does not assert when she obtained the documents or if she provided them to the State Water Board's prosecution team. Is that the basis for your objection to SOS 29?
That was to the scope of exhibits presented in the substance of the declaration. And as noted in the motion in limine, there was no testimony regarding the documents. All that was proffered was this document, and she was not identified as a witness. So by arguing that there was no testimony presented, that was the point.
Okay, I'm having trouble following this, Ms. Grady. I apologize. I understand one of your objections is that Ms. Doty was not identified in Story of Stuff Project's notice of intent to appear in the witness list. Is that correct? And then beyond that, do you have other objections to SOS 29, Ms. Doty's testimony?
As stated and discussed in the motion, each of the documents, the apparent purpose of this is simply to lay a foundation for documents. The documents are in large part not otherwise discussed in any testimony. So as far as a foundation being both the source of the document and the purpose for which it is being proffered, there is no discussion as to the purpose for which it is being proffered. So to that end, the primary purpose of this declaration appears to simply be to produce a substantial number of documents into the record that have not been relied upon in testimony. And to that end, I refer you back to Government Code Section 11513C, which provides that evidence that can be accepted into the record is that on which reasonable persons would rely in the conduct of serious affairs. And as we've raised repeatedly, we think it is not the type of documents upon which reasonable folks would rely in the conduct of serious affairs when no one explains why these documents are being dumped into the record. So we are concerned that the record is being papered with information upon which nobody is relying and upon which nobody is basing any argument. And it's an artificial record of what was presented.
All right, so regarding SOS 29, the objections are overruled for these reasons. First of all, as I said yesterday, I am troubled by the fact that Ms. Doty did not list herself as a witness in the Story of Stuff Project's NOI. However, the document, her declaration, which we labeled SOS 29, was uploaded, and then we made it available to all parties on December 17, or roughly there, a day or two thereafter. So I don't think there was any prejudice to BlueTriton from Story of Stuff's failure to list Ms. Doty in the witness list in the NOI, because BlueTriton did have notice of that. And frankly, I don't know if there would have been any material benefit to BlueTriton to know before December 17 that Ms. Doty was going to be a witness. So I don't think there was any prejudice. So exercising my discretion, I'm going to allow her testimony even though she was not listed in the NOI. Now, your remaining objection is that basically nobody's explained why, or Story of Stuff project has not explained why they have offered these documents. Well, Ms. Stoddard's testimony authenticated the documents, which I believe is sufficient to have them admitted into the record. Now, as I said yesterday, I share your concern, Ms. Grady, that there are many documents, not just Story of Stuff project, but also from Amanda Fry and the prosecution team, that I don't know how they are going to use them in their arguments. However, I don't think your objection is correct that they have to have witnesses explain how they are going to use exhibits during argument. If they're admitted into evidence, and I think they have been properly authenticated, and I'm not hearing any other objection to them, I think then they can use those in their arguments. And of course, as I said yesterday, if they're hearsay, then I'm going to give you an opportunity to object on the grounds in Government Code 11513 subdivision D. But I think the best way to proceed, and the way I'm going to proceed, is to allow or admit SOS 29 and allow Story of Stuff project and other parties to refer to those exhibits in their closing briefs. And then, as I say, you may object on hearsay grounds. I'm not sure there's going to be any other basis for objecting to documents that have been admitted into evidence. But if you think there is, when you see their closing brief and what they're using the documents to rely on for their arguments, you may so state. So with that, SOS 29 is admitted. Now, do you have objections to the other SOS exhibits?
SOS, sorry, I had feedback again. SOS 17, Story of Stuff, just recently changed what document was identified as SOS 17, and the newly proffered document that was not submitted in the earlier production, again, was not cited that I'm aware of by anybody in any testimony. So I think it lacks foundation and relevance.
Okay, now that's the fact that we basically had submitted the wrong document and we've uploaded and put in the correct one. I'm going to overrule any objection on that basis because I think you have had a chance to review that. But you're raising another concern that I think is pretty significant, and that is whether or not any witness has authenticated that document. So, Ms. Doty, does anybody's testimony authenticate Exhibit SOS 17?
Yes. So that was in my declaration. This is actually a report that was prepared by BlueTriton's predecessor's contractor. It's the Dames and Moore report. And Mr. Lowe actually referenced it today, and I believe Mr. Petrozelli had made some reference to it. And it was correctly noted in terms of title. It was just the wrong document was labeled 17. So it was already described, and it's a document that BTV should be familiar with since it's their own.
Okay, I do see it's listed in Ms. Doty's testimony on PDF page 3 in the documents that she's authenticated. So I think the document has been authenticated. Which, I think, Ms. Grady, you used the term foundation, but I think what you're talking about is authentication there. So do you have any further objection to it beyond that? I don't think there's any question that the document is what she states it is.
I have no further objections beyond those that are stated.
Okay. So do you have any objections to any of the other Story of Stuff projects? So the objections let me just finish so our record is clear. So the objections to SOS 17 are overruled. Now, and the exhibit will be admitted into evidence. And I know, Mr. Donlin, you may have to leave. We're going to wrap this up soon. Ms. Grady is certainly capable, obviously, as demonstrated, she's capable of representing BlueTriton on these issues. So I'm going to proceed just to wrap up the exhibits. And just so you know, we will come back tomorrow at 11 a.m. To talk about the other matters. So you can stay on if you can, but I understand you may have to leave, and I just want to let you know that's my plan.
Thank you, Mr. Lilly.
All right, so Ms. Grady, do you have any other objections to any of the other Story of Stuff project exhibits?
I have very briefly, and I can rattle them off. I think it's just a couple of them that in our review of the records, we didn't find any foundation proffered for them at all.
Okay, just remember, go slowly so you don't have the court reporter crash. We've got time.
Thank you for the reminder. SOS 4, SOS 58.
Let's go through one at a time. That's the best way to do it. So SOS 4, what is your objection?
I did not find any foundation provided for it whatsoever.
And Ms. Doty, is there authentication or foundation for SOS 4?
I believe that one's in my declaration. One let me double look. I believe it's at the end because it would have been a downloaded one.
I'm looking through the paper copy of yours. Please tell me if you find it. I haven't found it yet. Yeah, I don't see SOS 4 referenced in your declaration.
I don't either. So that may be an error.
Okay, so for SOS 4, the objection is sustained and the exhibit is not admitted into evidence.
The next one for which we could not find any foundation was SOS 58.
Okay, let's take a look at that. Just one moment. Okay, this was one of the so-called Roe papers. And what is your objection to SOS 58?
We did not identify anybody stating the source of this particular document.
Okay, so basically, again, an authentication issue. Ms. Doty, what is your response to this? And we can check. I don't know if it's in Mr. Lowe's testimony or not.
Mr. Lowe did talk about the award. Sorry, one moment. This is the.
Tell me what.
Mr. Lowe discussed it, but he did not discuss this, and as did Ms. Fry. But there's no need to fight over this document, so I don't believe it was authenticated.
All right. So with that, I'll take it you're withdrawing your offer for SOS 58.
Yes.
All right. So SOS 58, the objection. Well, the offer is withdrawn, so the exhibit is not admitted into evidence. All right. What is next, Ms. Grady?
SOS 54. We found no indication of authentication of this document.
Okay, SOS 54.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry, SOS 124.
That one was not offered into evidence.
I don't know whether I misheard or you misspoke.
Thank you. I withdraw my objection based on the fact that Story of Stuff had withdrawn that document from their proffer.
Okay, so it's not in.
Rendered moot. SOS 259. We did not identify a foundation.
Okay.
259.
259. Bear with us. Just give me a moment. All right, Ms. Doty, did anybody authenticate or discuss SOS 259 in their testimony?
This one would have been one that was Ms. Fry, I believe. So one moment.
All right, we'll take our time. We can check.
There were a lot of duplications, so I don't mean to run everyone in circles. We're trying to.
Ms. Grady, there is no need to apologize at all. This is very important. I don't see 259.
I don't either. We'll withdraw it.
Okay, so exhibit SOS 259 is withdrawn and not admitted into evidence. Okay, Miss Grady, anything else? Any other exhibits?
SOS 264.
All right. SOS 264.
This was
So it's same objection?
Yes, same objection.
So Ms. Doty, what's your response to SOS 264?
we'll withdraw that one.
Right, SOS 264 is withdrawn and not admitted into evidence.
And can I just have one brief moment?
I think you may have more than one brief moment because there are well over 100 exhibits here. So you want to pause? I have 2:37. You want to have 3 minutes? Is that enough or do you want more?
3 minutes would be fine. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to turn off camera and microphone. We'll come back at 2:40. All right, I'm back. We're just waiting for Miss Grady and her colleagues to come back.
Thank you.
All right, do you have any other objections Ms. Grady, to any of the Story of Stuff project exhibits?
SOS 260.
Okay, SOS 260. And what is your objection?
The same, no foundation, no authentication.
All right, Ms. Doty, what is your response? And take a moment if you need to.
I believe this is a special use permit from the Forest Service. So all of those came from the same source. They were all authenticated, and I believe they're also have already been admitted under Amanda Fry. This is the 1964 special use permit.
My copy of the table you submitted says SOS 260 is increased planning makes trout season prospects bright, Redlands Daily Facts.
I'm sorry, I thought we were talking about 260. What number are we talking about? 160?
SOS 260.
Oh, I thought you said 264. My apology. I see.
And
SOS 260.
We'll withdraw that. That's already been admitted under Amanda Fry's set.
Okay, SOS 260 is withdrawn and not admitted into evidence. Any others, Ms. Grady?
those are it, with the exception of Mr. Lowe's written testimony, which I believe is Low 31. And I am not restating the prior objections that you overruled, but instead object to certain paragraphs to the extent that they address public trust issues, and it's paragraphs which are outside of the scope of the proceeding pursuant to your November 4th ruling. And they are paragraphs 30 through 32, 40 through 43, and 53 through 55.
All right, so let me take a look at those. And Ms. Story, you should probably take a look at these too.
And can we, since I have stated those objections and Mr. Donlin did have to leave early and he is lead counsel here, we do ask that we can maybe cease now and resume this discussion in the morning.
Okay, I really wanted to try to wrap up the exhibits. That was where I was going to stop. So
this might provide everybody opportunity to have an informed discussion on those issues.
I'm sorry, on which issues?
But my objection to these 3 paragraphs rather than having us all read here together.
Oh, well, I don't know. Ms. Doty, do you have a response to this objection?
I do.
What is your response?
Okay, so with regard to paragraph 30, it's discussing quantitative or the qualitative description by Mr. Rowe of a landscape that couldn't be supported today because of water diversion. So this is directly on point for the reason that we were allowed to discuss the flora and fauna of the area. It talks about riparian ecosystem is absent because of the lack of water. So that is directly on point, and then it could sustain more species. Moving down through 31 and 32 could sustain more species, but for the change in flow. So that is evidence that surface water has been removed, which is precisely the issue in this hearing.
Yeah, I think they're couched in terms of aquatic vegetation, but I think 30 through 32 are at least marginally relevant to our hearing issues on hydrology. And I do appreciate, Ms. Grady, your concern that we get into the public trust issues, which I can assure you we're not going to based on my prior ruling. But I think those 3 paragraphs are at least relevant enough that they can come in for the purpose of explaining hydrology. I mean, obviously, even if they're in evidence, I'm not going to suddenly start issuing findings on aquatic vegetation issues in and of themselves, what we might call public trust issues, separate from the hydrology issues. So let's go on to 40 through 43. Ms. Doty, what's your response to these?
Mr. Lilly, I am going to restate our request that we cease today. We are now 17 minutes beyond what I understood to be the agreed time. Mr. Donlin would like to participate in this proceeding. Our client would like Mr. Donlin to participate in this proceeding. We have tried to be respectful of all other parties' other commitments.
All right, so just so I'm clear, is this your last objection to any of the Story of Stuff project exhibits? And just so we're clear, you've been stating all these objections, not Mr. Donlin. So I don't think I'm prejudicing BlueTriton's rights to ask you to address these objections. But let me just please just answer the question. Is this the last objection you have to SOS exhibits?
I believe this is the last objection to the SOS exhibits. And
All right.
I fully submit that I work with Mr. Donlin, although I may be the person speaking. We are certainly entitled to speak to one another as the proceeding progresses.
All right, so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop in a moment after I tell you what we're going to do tomorrow. We'll stop the hearing today. Ms. Doty, this will give you more time to respond to the objections to these paragraphs. I wrote down 30 to 32, 40 to 43, and 50 to 55 of the Lowe Declaration, which is Exhibit SOS 31. So we will resume the discussion of the admissibility of those paragraphs of that exhibit when we reconvene tomorrow morning at 11 in response to Ms. Grady's request. After we do that, my notes we still have Mr. Lowe's presentation of his testimony that he offered as an independent party in this matter. And on that, Mr. Lowe, I strongly recommend, even though it's your testimony, you have Ms. Doty, who's certainly a very qualified attorney. She's demonstrated that during this hearing. And I recommend you consult with her regarding what, if anything, you need to do to provide an oral summary. She can help you explain to you what the rules are, but summary means summary. That means here are the three main points I made in my written testimony that I want to emphasize today. It does not mean going back and testifying over everything or adding materials to that. So please spend some time this afternoon on that. And related to that, I received an email from you, I believe today, which you did send to all the other parties on the service list, and I appreciate that, which asked if you could discuss a USGS flow gauge data. I think it was on East Trenton Creek, and you provided a link to the USGS webpage for that. And the answer is no, you may not do that. That is just clearly new evidence. And we're way past the deadline for submitting new evidence. So I'm sorry, but we do have to have some control over these proceedings as far as requiring parties to follow the rules for submitting evidence. Now, it's possible that may come in, or you may be able to offer that and it may be accepted as rebuttal evidence. I don't know. We will have to see. But again, if Ms. Doty's willing to provide you some free legal advice on that, I recommend you talk to her about that. But that would be in the next round of proceedings, not for tomorrow. And if you do that and you decide to try that, of course, BlueTriton may object if they want to, and we'll consider it at that time. But if you do that, please make sure what you submit would be PDF files of the gauge data and a map showing the location of the gauge. We don't want to accept a web link into evidence. The problem is if we have that in the record, the web may change over time and we don't have a solid record to that. So that's why we have to have PDF files. So please consider that, but not for tomorrow. So I see your hand up as Mr. Lowe. Do you have a further question regarding the process?
Yeah, I just wanted to get clarification from you. We've been real respectful, I think all of us, to stay away from public trust and arguing the public trust. And I understand that that's what you want us to stay away from because you don't want to argue that here. That's the board has responsibilities for public trust and for wildlife and for fish and for aesthetics and for downstream users, but we're not arguing that here. It almost sounds like BlueTriton thinks that that's not even part of your consideration. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Don't get into arguments now. Let me just explain that this was set out in my ruling. And you're absolutely right that the State Water Resources Control Board has responsibilities in all of those areas. The reason my ruling limited the scope of this hearing to not include public trust issues and some of the other things mentioned in the ruling is that the prosecution team's draft cease and desist order and related report of investigation concluded that it was not going to pursue those. And this hearing is at least broadly determined by the issues that the prosecution team decided to pursue. I don't, we'll probably get into this. As I've ruled before, we are allowed to receive evidence beyond what the prosecution team submitted or had in its files. And I think at least in some of the specifics of the legal issues, we don't have to follow exactly what the prosecution team's arguments were. But these issues regarding public trust and reasonable use, they very explicitly decided not to pursue, right. And therefore they're just not before my office. So that's why they're not in this hearing, even though they are within the board's responsibility. So does that give you some clarification on that?
Yes, and I think we've been real respectful. I hope you think that too.
Well, we've tried to rule. I've tried to rule properly on all objections, and clearly there are some gray areas here between what's relevant to our hearing issues and what's not. And that's why we've done that. So we will proceed tomorrow. But as I say, please consider what you want to provide on a summary. If it's going to be a 10-page narrative statement, I'm probably not going to, well, I'll say BlueTriton probably will object, and I probably won't allow it because it's very hard for a 10-page narrative to be a summary of your 15 or 17 pages of testimony. So it's got to be just some points, or you don't need to at all. We can just offer your written testimony, which goes into quite a bit of detail, and that will be accepted into the record. So we will discuss that tomorrow. The other two things, I want to give everyone advance notice, so we've got it. I am going to discuss Center for Biological Diversities. Let me see here if I've got the date. There was a Center for Biological Diversity request for documents from, which I'm trying to get the date, came in on January 24th from Ms. Belenke. There was a response from Mr. Donlin on January 28th. So I do want to discuss that briefly. So Ms. Belenke, you're on notice, and Ms. Grady, please tell Mr. Donlin he's on notice. I'd like to discuss that tomorrow. And then I also received a letter dated January 30 from Mr. Donlin, which concerns it talks about a renewed motion to dismiss or for non-suit and the January 26th request for data and information from my office. So we will discuss that tomorrow as well. Then we will also just briefly discuss the site visit and the plan for rebuttal testimony and evidence. Is there anything else anybody believes we need to discuss tomorrow or should discuss tomorrow? Yes, Ms. Doty.
I wanted to talk about some direction on the rebuttal, and the right to rebuttal, because it appears from several pieces of correspondence and from BTB's original NOI and their NOI that they submitted on the day evidence was due, that they've made a strategic decision to reserve primarily their case in chief for rebuttal. They haven't put on any technical experts, any water rights experts yet. And so I wanted to make sure that we're given the opportunity to rebut what will probably be quite substantive and original testimony.
Okay, and that's definitely something we can talk about tomorrow. In response to Ms. Grady's request, I don't want to do that without Mr. Donlin being present, but he's going to be present tomorrow. And I certainly planned to talk about this scope of rebuttal tomorrow, which I think will include discussing the issues you've just mentioned. So let's do that tomorrow.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else for today? And reminder, tomorrow we will be starting at 11 a.m. So with that, everybody have a good day, and I will be in touch tomorrow morning. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.